Alexei Navalny met his bleak end here above Russia's Arctic Circle, in a country where it is winter in more ways than one. His death at this penal colony as chilling as it was predictable. Today his mother Ludmila came in search of her son's body. She was kept waiting for 2 hours, then told it wasn't there. She last saw him 5 days ago, when she said he was healthy and cheerful. So did he really die after a fall, or did the Putin regime kill him, as it's tried to do at least once before?
The main thing is that Alexei didn't die, he was murdered. I think that everyone should understand that it is Vladimir Putin who personally ordered to kill Alexei Navalny. Right now we don't have access to the body and we don't know for sure where it is. And we demand that Russian authorities immediately give Alexei's body to his family.
This was Alexei Navalny joking in a video link court appearance the day before his death. His return home 3 years ago was as brave as it was unwise. But if irrelevance is the fate that politicians fear most, then he was determined to avoid it, as Russia's most significant political prisoner since the end of the Cold War. In Moscow this morning, protesters were met with a glacial police response. Several Navalny supporters were arrested. Why can't we stand here? Russia's a free country, this woman shouted, before she was bundled away. But just a few hundred detentions in this vast nation tells you how dangerous opposing Vladimir Putin now is. Instead, they laid flowers at the memorial built to the victims of Joseph Stalin, known as the Wall of Grief, and commissioned by Putin himself, though even here it wasn't safe. I just feel sincerely sorry for Navalny, said this woman, who was careful not to give her surname. I can't say anything else. Last night, men in black were seen stuffing tributes to the dissident into black bin bags under police guard. All this next door to the old KGB headquarters. While in Munich, G7 foreign ministers stood for a minute's silence. Navalny himself wrote last month that you have to stand up for your beliefs if they're to be worth anything. But how to stand up to Vladimir Putin when his regime has already been heavily sanctioned over Ukraine?
There should be consequences when appalling human rights outrages like this take place. What we do is we look at whether there are individual people that are responsible and whether there are individual measures and actions that we can take.
Ukraine's president was there to plead for weapons and ammunition after losing territory to Putin overnight and using Navalny's death to reinforce his message.
Putin kills whoever he wants. He is a thug who maintains power through corruption and violence. Please, do not ask Ukraine when the war will end. Ask yourself, why is Putin still able to continue it?
Alexei Navalny may have died out of sight, but not out of the minds of these Russians remembering him in St. Petersburg. If he becomes a martyr, he could do more to change Russia dead than when he was alive, though it always takes a long time for Russia's winter to end. Tonight, Navalny's mother was still looking for him in Siberia. She was told that he wasn't in a local morgue and that his body would not be released until an official investigation was over.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Professor Mark Galeotti, who's a Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and the author of Putin's Wars. I started by asking him the significance of Navalny's body going missing.
I think it's important simply in symbolic terms about the combination of callousness and deliberate, frankly, deception that is really at the heart of how, frankly, the Kremlin has handled this whole case of Navalny's imprisonment, even before his death. So, I mean, I think that, obviously the facts of his death are important, but it's also the degree to which the Kremlin is still visiting its malice upon him even after that death that matters. It's probably less likely that this was a deliberate and specific assassination, so much as that Navalny, who after all had already been poisoned with Novichok and then was sent in these terribly harsh conditions in the Arctic Circle, was just placed in a situation in which he was unlikely ever to actually walk alive out of that labor camp. So, I mean, I don't think the Kremlin wanted it to happen right now. And in that respect, maybe this is in part kind of, in a way, Navalny's final revenge.
Are you buying this idea that he wasn't actually murdered, that he might indeed have just keeled over?
Well, look, I mean, there's murder and there's murder. There's murder in the sense of a deliberate and specific act, and there's murder indirectly in the sense of putting someone in a situation in which they're unlikely to survive. I think the latter we can certainly pin on Putin. The first one, we really don't know.
There's a theme that runs through the Western response to Ukraine and Russia in the last 2 years. And people are not able to make up their minds whether they're more afraid of Putin winning in Ukraine or Putin losing in Ukraine and therefore being pushed into a nuclear corner. Does this event change anything at all in terms of Western calculations?
Well, I think there's 2 points to make there. One is in terms of, look, the very risks of what happens if Putin loses in Ukraine is something that the Kremlin itself mobilizes. So we shouldn't, to a degree, be too afraid of that, because that's actually Putin's game. More broadly, I mean, I think what this definitely shows is, frankly, a regime which can absolutely reach out and kill who it wants, but which is also genuinely feeling more worried about its situation. Frankly, the fact that Putin felt the need to silence, muzzle, and eventually kill Navalny says more about his fears than anything else.
And yet, at the same time, we know that 30% of the Russian economy is geared towards the war, even though they've lost hundreds of thousands of men on the front line. They have an unlimited supply of more men they can send into the meat grinder. Is your assessment at the moment that they're in this for the long haul and they think they can win?
Well, Putin is certainly in this for the long haul because he has no real choice. But the interesting thing is, when we talk about the apparently unlimited manpower that can be thrown into the war, certainly before next month's presidential elections, Putin is clearly being very cautious. Some of his generals want a new mobilization wave, hundreds of thousands of more Russians raised to be sent to the front. Putin is not doing that precisely because Putin realizes that there is a limit to how much patience and how much intimidation he can assume that he can deploy. So I think in this respect, actually, although, yes, at the moment there is no serious challenger to Putin, but nonetheless, Putin himself clearly appreciates that there are limits to how far he can go.
Do you think that the events of the last week might galvanize support for Ukraine and against Putin?
When we come to the discussions currently taking place in Washington about a very large US aid plan, that Navalny's death makes it all the harder for those hardline Republicans who are still digging in to continue to block that package.
Mark Galeotti, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.